I don't know. You were telling me you think a lot of small town newspapers might actually be like this, and maybe that's the difference. I'm used to these kind of big cities of 70,000, 100,000 people where I live, whereas you only have 7,000 people living. Maybe you have to do journalism a bit differently there.
Yeah, I mean, well, you got to look at the people who are involved as well. I mean, I'm very new. I think a lot of recent graduates from journalism school are going to community newspapers such as this one, weekly newspapers. So, it's a different crowd, I think, that you'll approach when you come to these papers. It's also, there's also the aspect of usually there's only one reporter covering all the news that's going on in these towns. So there's a lot of work involved for the employees. So there's sort of a culture, I guess, you could say. I'm guessing this is similar to other community newspapers in the province and across Canada, because I know that this is the place where you go for the first year or two to start out and get your bearings, get your portfolio together, learn. You're learning a ton. I'm right now, because there's so much responsibility right now for the editorial content. I'm learning. Right. I have to learn.
Well, it's interesting because
so hard. I won't learn.
Yeah, we discussed that fact that kind of a lot of the new students, the new graduates of the journalism schools and such, end up in places like Merritt because that's kind of how the system is. You start out somewhere where there's an opening, usually because there's such high turnover in these little cities. That's where you end up getting your first journalism job. You kind of cut your teeth on the streets of these small towns, and then eventually you move on and do other things. Which maybe, perhaps, you said, might explain why some of the journalism isn't always as good. Does that condemn Merritt to that kind of thing, or is that just kind of the way it is, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in a condemned state?
I'm not sure what you mean by condemned.
Well, I guess when I condemned, I mean like condemned to having kind of inexperienced journalists in town. I mean, you're obviously never going to get.
That would be a very good thing, though. When you're coming out of journalism school, you want so badly to prove yourself as a journalist. You want to prove it to yourself, mainly. Anyway, that's the case for me. So I'm doing whatever I can to get as good of a story that I can get and submit as many stories as I can and just do the best job that I can do because I'm proving myself. I'm proving myself to future employers. I'm proving myself to myself. So I think it's sort of a good thing that there's young journalists coming out of school and just energetic. I've spoken to editors when I was in school, and they said they love having new journalists come because they're just so full of energy and they have a fresh pair of eyes and they're fresh out of school, so they may have not developed poor habits and they're able to work their butts off, basically.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, actually, because they are wanting to prove something, and it's obviously their first crack. They're excited. Myself, I mean, having the opportunity to talk to you and get an in-depth interview with you, I mean, I get to see that as a young guy, you have a lot of really good understanding of what you've done, and I've had the opportunity to read some of the articles you wrote. You write about 7 articles per newspaper, is that correct?
Yeah, on average. Last one was 8. The first one I did was 10.
Oh, God.
It's changed a little bit since I've gotten here because I'm laying out the paper more than the previous reporter. So the expectation is to have 10 stories in every week, or 7 to 10 stories in every week. But I do whatever I can.
How are there 10 stories in a city like Merritt when there's only 7,000 people? How is that possible?
How is there 10 stories?
Yeah, how is it possible for there to be 10 things going on in Merritt? I mean, to me, Merritt, I mean, it's bigger now than it used to be, but it just seems to me finding stories in a little city like that must be a little tough.
I thought the same thing when I was coming out here. I thought, wow, how am I going to come up with all these story ideas? Usually the editor comes up with a lot, but also the reporter works a lot in these small communities to come up with a lot of story ideas. So before I came out here, I thought, how am I going to do this? I spoke to some of my instructors at Woolgar College, Ross Howard, who's one of Webster's great guy, great teacher, and he told me you look at the fire hall, you look at the police station, you look at City Hall, and then you choose stories from that and you write them. And there's a lot of truth to that, but there's been stories coming from people walking in here, phone calls I get, sometimes stories that may have been turned down before, but I think that the
Yeah, well, sometimes it's a matter of perspective. Like I was in Merritt for a couple of hours there, maybe 16 hours tops. I probably got in at 3 in the afternoon. I guess maybe almost 24 hours. Maybe almost 24 hours. 6 of which I was sleeping. But at the time that I was there, I mean, I had a couple of ideas too, thinking, if I was here and I was reporting on something, this is something I might want to look more into. I think this might kind of be interesting. I think when you get kind of a mindset, I know that if I were in your shoes working in Merritt, there's a couple of pretty interesting feature ideas I would have. It's just a matter of kind of perspective and where you get your ideas from and how you decide what does and does not make a good story. And a lot of that just comes from good training and good insight, which can make the difference between a reporter who stays in Merritt and one that actually gets hired elsewhere when they see your kind of out of the box and interesting approach to news stories.
Yeah, definitely. It's just the way you look at it. You're exactly right. The news sense, some people have it, some people don't. I guess I'm learning to see whether or not I do have it, and some angles I've approached with certain stories have, I think they've done fairly well.
Yeah, well, as I said, I read some of your stories, and I quite liked them. I thought they were right. As a news story goes, I mean, the downside to working in a community newspaper is you only have so many words to get out what you have to say, where on the internet, where I'm at, I can ramble on for 10 pages if I feel like it. I mean, no one's going to read any of them, but I mean, at least I have that option, whereas you get so many words to make your point, to make your case, which I think is an added challenge, especially in such a small town.
Yeah, actually, I have written a feature-length article. It was on mixed martial arts, and it was about 2,000 words. And we had 1,000 words for the first week, and then it was a 2-week continuous, the two-part thing, and we had another 1,000 words for next week. So I think there is a little bit of freedom with that. But usually the stories that you do get are only worthy of about 400 to 500 words.
Right.
But the freedom is there if there is more information that needs to be told to the public. We can't say it.
Right. Now, as I said before, there was some criticism leveled at the Merritt media and the way things were handled. But again, I don't know how representative that was. I spoke to a couple of people. I don't know how representative they are of the whole. But I know you put out a weekly edition that gets sent out to everyone. They don't have to pay for it. The people I spoke to on the street, some of them said they were very happy and said it was much better than the other paper in town. How important is it to you what people think of your newspaper?
It's very important. That's the first step towards having a successful newspaper. So there's the business side of it. You want to have the readership so that you have the advertisers later on. If you have a newspaper that's going up to 50, 100 people like ours, or if you're having one that's going up to a lot fewer, the one that has the most readers is going to gain more advertisement, which is revenue for newspaper companies. But then there's also the aspect of, as a writer, I don't want to write something and have somebody think, wow, this is terrible.
Right.
I want somebody to say, good job, I like your writing, keep it up. So there's two sides to that. We're definitely wanting to appeal to everybody. We have all ears open to any input that we can get from the community, as long as it's intelligible input. We like to have people write letters to the editor. If they get through that screening process, then there's a good indication that they are intelligent people with good opinions and good advice on how we can better the paper.
I guess in a way, I have kind of a tough final question for you, Phil. I mean, you are working towards working at a bigger newspaper somewhere. Let's say that happens. Let's say the Vancouver Sun or the Vancouver Province, somebody says, hey, that Phillip guy's doing a great job up in Merritt. We should definitely get him coming here. And they decide and say, hey, come on, you don't have to work those 50 hours. You don't have to worry about the layout of the newspaper. You can just come on down here, write a couple of stories a week. We'll pay you a little bit more, and you can relax a bit. I mean, obviously, you probably have to say yes to that if that's the right career move. But is there a piece of you that would miss working in Merritt?
Absolutely. I'm learning so much here. And I think, it's hard for me to say. I don't know if I'm ready for the Vancouver Sun. Even though I've written for them before, I don't know if I am. I know that I can benefit a lot by being here for the next few months, for a year. I don't know. As long as I'm learning,